Hello and welcome to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly read-along Wheel of Time podcast that finished a book! Yay! Woo! We've only done that 8 times so far in this long-running show, so it's very exciting whenever we get to the end.
It only took us almost 4 years.
Excuse me. Do not speak until I introduce you. People don't know who's here. They're confused by that voice. I'm so sorry, listeners. I've been trying to get him to behave himself. So, we are here to talk about the end of Book 8, The Path of Daggers, with 2 regular-sized chapters and 1 really quick one at the end. And we can't wait to talk about it and close out this book. Joining me tonight, as you probably already know, is my co-host, Tylor. Tylor, what's going on?
You know, we're finishing a book. That is what's going on. That is what is exciting. I'll be honest, this week very much felt like a chapter and then some post-credit sequences. So I'm excited to break that down for you. Although I don't want to dive too much in detail in what those post-credit sequences are yet, because not everyone's finished the movie. I'm kind of curious about your overall take on this book, right? Are you feeling like this was a good one? Was it like, Where did you land now that we have completed our journey?
I think I'd go more, it was fine. I wouldn't call it a disappointment. I don't think this should be like cast into the fire or anything like that. But I think in terms of the arc of this series, this was much more of a like treading water than it felt like a real strong advance of the plots. And, I joke sometimes about our format, but our format is kind of such that it doesn't really matter if a book is not that bad. Listeners, I think we already mentioned this, but I will mention again, we are going to take just a couple weeks off in between this book and the next because we haven't done that in a while, and it helps us with some summer vacations and so on. So I, if this were the only Wheel of Time book I'd gotten and then I had to wait 2 years for the next volume, I'd probably be grumpy. But that's not my experience. My experience is like, oh, okay. Like, we were just joking before we hit record. I'm going to read the prologue of the next book relatively soon, maybe not immediately. So it doesn't feel too off to me.
Yeah, I will say, as much as like next episode we'll talk about like reception to this book and how much it's loved or disliked or what have you, one of the major things that goes into how people feel about this book, I think you just referenced, which is the fact that Book 7 was the last Wheel of Time book that came out kind of roughly within a year, maybe a year and a half of the previous one. This was the first Wheel of Time book that people had to wait for, and then they knew the next one would be another long wait. And so I think that idea that this was a book that kind of stood on its own, as opposed to our format where it'll be a couple weeks until you can start the next one, I think probably makes a pretty big difference in terms of how we're perceiving this book. Any last thoughts on just kind of this book and these chapters in general before we dive into... We haven't named the 3 chapters yet. They are A Cup of Sleep, Beginnings, and After. Any thoughts before we dive in?
I think the last thing I would say about it is just on the whole, this book, even if not a lot happened and it felt sluggish at times, it has felt very quick. I mean, I know listeners, you get these a little tiny bit on delay sometimes. Sometimes we're right up on the wire. But this really had lasted January to May, which is the shorter, maybe the shortest season in quotation marks we've had.
I think that's right.
Because we've had some that are usually around more towards 6 months, and I know as we get to the end, there will be some like 2-year series, but some longer series. So I do think that I'm also going to remember this as this was a pretty quick one. And looking quickly at my page count on Winter's Heart, it's it's slightly longer, but it's not crazy different than this, and especially where we have a very long prologue again, it may end up being kind of the same number of weeks, even if the page count's a little higher.
Yeah, coming out of books 4 through 6, which are all over 1,000 pages long in a basic trade paper or a basic paperback, boy, does it feel like this is just so much quicker. I think that's exactly right. And that was the one thing I was a little worried about with this book, is whether spreading it out over 4 months would make it feel not as quick, because I'll be honest, the quick is the best thing I can say about this novel overall. It's not one of my favorites. But let's dive into what I think was a pretty good chapter to start the 3 we covered today, which is A Cup of Sleep. Min tells Rand to talk about her, which we learn is Elaine, but Rand says he knows which letter to believe now. Fedwin Moore seems uneasy at being included in this discussion because apparently Taim brought news from Caemlyn this morning, sparking the argument because Elaine has chosen not to accept his gift of the throne. Min says that Rand is sulking over Elaine, even though she has control of the city, which was intended for her, and insists that he just go and discuss it with her. Cerylea then enters with 5 Aes Sedai who have been made Datsang and thus have been punished repeatedly. They have all seemingly recognized the error of their ways, and Cerylea says that Rand can decide their fates, and it's worth noting several of these are Aes Sedai that Varen was interrogating in the prologue of the book. Rand then studies the women, then asks Arianne why she would be willing to swear to him after he killed her warders, and she simply said that they were wrong to take him. Beldine references the need for greens at the last battle as her reason, and Min sees that she will bond in Ashaman, but she doesn't understand how. Serene then says it is logical that they should follow Rand. Nassoon wants to study Rand, and Elza says she wants to ensure he makes it to the last battle. Rand asks if they would accept being put in a box, and Min sees a vision that the women, including Cerylea, will serve him in their own way, and she tells Rand about this. He tells them to swear to him, and they do. As she leaves, Cerylea says that Cadsuan is here, and Rand decides to see her. Suddenly, a wall in the hallway explodes, killing several Maidens of the Spear and destroying the corridor. Rand orders Fedwin Moore to protect Min with his life. We then jump forward in time when Rand is channeling, knowing a man or men channeled the attack because he was able to feel them. When Rand channels, he argues with Lews Therin about controlling the power, and Lews says he could have sent Ilyena away, and that would have been better. Rand searches for his would-be assassins, avoiding allies and maidens to avoid giving up his position, and he sweeps the palace, trying to avoid notice by Cadsuan, who has 6 Aes Sedai with her. He then spots Hareen of the Sea Folk with Alil, one of the women who tried to kill him previously, and he knocks them out to avoid detection. But as he leaves the room, he spots Dashiva, Gedwyn, and Roshade, who apparently detected him channeling. Rand uses one of Lews Therin's weaves, unsure who is actually channeling him or Lews Therin, and he protects himself from a strike that comes from Dashiva. He lashes out and then runs, eventually feeling a gateway open, and when he spots a black cloak, he attacks, but it turns out to be Narishma and Flynn. He searches the palace for hours, and then, quote, finds pain. We then switch into Min's POV, who watches a newly paranoid Rand studying Moore, who is building a tower of blocks and is shielded by Rand. Min thinks that he has the mind of a young boy, and then Mazrim Taim arrives, and Rand castigates him for holding Saidin in Rand's presence. Taim says that he was ready if the maidens attacked, and that's why he's holding the power. He lists the traitors, adding Torval and Kinsman to the list, and offers to take Moore with him. Rand then gives Moore a cup of poison that he learned about from Nynaeve, and Taim says that Rand is harder than he thought, and Rand tells him to add Dashiva to the list of traitors, which seems to shock Taim. He tells Taim not to return, and then tells Min he now knows he needs to become the hunter, and Min tells Rand he can cry, and he says he has no time to cry. So, big ol' explosion at the end of this book. Not exactly what you predicted, but also not like the big epic conclusion that we've come to expect in many cases. What was your take on A Cup of Sleep?
Well, and it fits a pattern with Robert Jordan that have a big event, but like almost have it happen off screen. I mean, it's not totally off screen, but I definitely had that moment of like, wait, what just happened? Like, I need to reread that and make sure I carefully understood that. And so I think that's pretty surprising and kind of this pathway towards, like figuring out the factions within the Ashaman, but also like there's what is presented versus what is probably true. I still think Taim is like, double playing this a little bit and so on. So it was like a confusing chapter in that regard, both in terms of like what's literally going on and what is the gap between what is being described and the truth, which I think is there.
Make sure at the end of this chapter that we talk about Taim and his link to this plot, because that is something I want to break down in more detail, but it's also at the end of the chapter, so I don't want to jump there immediately, because there is kind of an interesting couple of developments before everything explodes, right? The first of these is we learn that Rand is upset that Elaine has seemingly taken Caemlyn, but not taken him up on his offer. She is claiming the throne on her own. And the odd thing here is that Min not only is like, go talk to her, a couple of times she's like, go and like kiss that girl. And that is not the attitude I expect from Min, given that she very clearly was like, let me run off and get in Rand's good graces before the other two can get there. So what were your thoughts on Min, Rand, and Elaine in this chapter?
Well, and sorry, I was just trying to think of the show, but the show played up the
Avienda
other
and Elaine. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, Avienda and Elaine. So, like, yeah. So I think, I mean, I'm just going to continue being who I am and say, like, it doesn't really compel me. I mean, it seems like, you know, a poly relationship is going to be complicated no matter what. And yet, like, they all seem kind of surprised by how complicated it is. But, or no, let me say that different. They all are like, it should be simple, just be simple. And I'm like, I think it should be a little complicated, right?
I need to be really clear how proud I am of Robert Jordan for basically coming up with a polycule 25 years before that term entered the lexicon. Like, I think this is actually pretty well drawn as far as Robert Jordan's All the Romance Happens Off Screen. Like, it's pretty well done. I have nothing else to say about it.
And you're right that we tease him so often for all the grossness, but like this is pretty progressive to both have it exist and have it largely not be a plot point, right?
Yeah.
And I remember in my pop culture life, that was what they said about same-sex relationships on screen, right? Like there was this generation of art where the whole point was like, oh, this character is gay and you have to explore how hard it is to be gay. And eventually we got just to like, oh, gay characters can exist in these worlds, or whatever those worlds may be in those stories. They just happen to be gay. It's not the point of the story. And this feels very much in that second camp in terms of something that is still really not widely accepted. So yeah, pretty good job, Robert Jordan. Sorry for all the other times I'm not sorry about all the naked locker room conversations we had to imagine.
Don't worry, we'll talk about unnecessary nakedness soon. It happens in
also,
these
please
chapters.
don't clip out that comment I just said and put some more. Go ahead.
I then want to jump into the other piece that happens before the hallway explodes, which is these 5 Aes Sedai who were part of the group that kidnapped Rand and who refused to swear to Rand previously have seemingly been broken by the Aiel. These are the ones that Cerelia was looking for ways to punish them that would work, and Varen gave her ways of punishing them that would work, and it seems to have worked. The one additional note that I have here is 2 of the 5 were among the Aes Sedai that Varen was meeting with at the beginning of this book when she was doing channeling that felt oddly close to compulsion, and we had some like worries about her being Black Aja or doing something that wasn't quite in line with Rand's goals. And so if what she was doing was convincing them in some way to swear to Rand and then betray him, that's iffy. But also worth noting, Min says they'll serve him. So what do you make of this?
I mean, serve them in some capacity, right? Like in their own.
In their own way, yeah.
In their own way. So it seemed like they were leaving a little space there that they might have come to an understanding of how far their loyalty goes, or, you know, the specific role they're willing to play. But I will say the main feeling I had is that it felt meaningful that we don't have the answer to that. It felt like next book we will have it revealed what exactly they've lived through and Rand's reaction to it, right? Like, I'm reading Rand is kind of generally accepting this, like, oh, good, that problem is solved. And I suspect, like, next book it'll be like, oh, wait, you, like, accepted tortured people who, you know, only followed you out of pain of death or something like that.
Yeah, and the one that I think Rand emphasizes first, because it's the most surprising one, is apparently one of these women lost 2 warders to Rand. And given what we know about the warder bond and how devastating it is to lose a warder, like that feels like the one that I'm really skeptical of. That is also one of the 2 women, I believe Beldine, who Varen had put her weave on. And so we've got to be very curious about the dynamics of this group. I think you're right. This is something to keep an eye on in future books. Any other thoughts about the Aes Sedai before everything literally explodes?
In my mind, for whatever reason, I just went to Don Draper. Like it'll be amazing how much I don't think about these Aes Sedai, right? Like that just tends to be what I find. And again, I think that's probably more my flaw than Robert Jordan's. But there are just so many. It's like here's a group of 5, and you kind of maybe picture one of them, and then we move on. And so it's like, oh, okay.
I'm on like my 5th or 6th full time through this series, and I am just now remembering names like Nisun and Beldine. So don't worry about it too much. That's everyone's experience the first time through here. I guess then what we get to is, hey, Greg, political assassination isn't just a problem in the real world. It's also a thing in Randland. What do we think about this?
I mean, I don't want to be flippant about anything at all. And yet I do think, it strikes me that you try to cut off the head, right? And that just continues to be what this the forces working against this have one clear target, right?
Yeah.
We'll talk next chapter too, but it does feel like, there are lots of ways you could hurt Rand, but everybody goes for the king, right? It's take down the biggest guy in the yard and you'll be the king of the yard, right? And so it feels to me like, it only makes sense. And I get it only makes sense that those arrayed against Rand would try to just take him out, because this does seem like it would all fall apart without him. And then, I guess the only surprise then kinda is that it comes from the ranks of the Ashaman, but yeah, not really.
But it's worth noting 4 of the 5 Ashaman who are named as conspirators were not part of Rand's group. Only Dashiva is someone who was with Rand from the beginning and is a part of this plot. And so that I think is especially notable, that it's not as if some of the Ashaman who we were worried about a few chapters ago, none of them turned, right? It wasn't Mor, it wasn't Narishma, it wasn't the others, it was just Dashiva. But that does mean one of your pet theories has gone out the window, right? Your theory was Rand picked an Ashaman at random, and by picking Dashiva, he must have done something great. It was Taviran working in his favor. He actually chose the one who would end up destroying his room.
Fair, and I take that. Although, did I remember that? Maybe we'll see. No.
You remembered the theory, just not the name.
Yes, that is accurate, and I do think then I guess I'm left kind of questioning the motivations, because those aren't totally clear here.
Yeah.
And because it's men channeling, I immediately jump to well, were they acting actually out of loyalty, but they are confused what loyalty is because they've gone a little mad? Or is this really a conspiracy to take down Rand, or is it something more akin to the Black Aja within the Ashaman, whatever you would call that, to get us closer?
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting questions is, if this seems like, at least from Rand's observation, 3 individuals he spots, it's Dashiva, Gedwyn, and Roshade. It's worth noting Gedwyn and Roshade were both in the campaign in Ilion. They were both in charge of the Ashaman there, but they were both kind of Taim loyalists, if you want to think about it that way. And so I'm kind of left wondering, is this a conspiracy that predated Rand selecting Dashiva and they kind of reunited in Ilion? Or is this something new that came about as a result of Rand, accidentally killing a number of Ashaman and other soldiers when he used Kalendor? And so that motivation question you're asking about, I think, is definitely the biggest dangling thread here as far as I'm concerned. The other thing that surprises me is, why only strike once, man? Make sure he's dead. But I guess that's just Taviran or plot holes or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I was going to say, even though I'm questioning their motivation, and I just raised the question of, is it just madness? It doesn't feel like it's madness. It, like you said, it feels more like a conspiracy, but I'm not totally sure what their motivation was. And if it is just, hey, we were given this extra set of abilities, why can't we be kings, or what have you? That seems a little thin. So I imagine they are being manipulated. And I would still lean towards a Forsaken or somebody who's really powerful, possibly compelling them. but it could just be a Taim figure who is trying to, solidify his own power.
And may I just say, for listeners who are going to have a couple weeks between books, for the love of God, do not Google the names Deshiva, Gedwin, or Roshade. One of them, you Google it, and it immediately pops up a spoiler about what's going on here. Do not do it. I then want to actually jump to the one oddity in this section, which is, you mentioned, is madness the thing that is driving these men? I think the reason that I'm less likely to think that, at least on first read, is simply because Rand feels so mad here, right? There's literally a moment where he debates with Lews Therin which one of them will get to weave the flows, and then he's not sure if he won that argument when he weaves flows. And that feels even further than we've seen him before, right? And it's a question, I think, of like how much of that is like the madness that's induced by channeling versus how much of it is just like Rand crumbling under the insane pressure that happens when you're the king and someone tries to kill you.
Well, I don't have a lot to add on top of that, because I think you pose that not as a question to answer, but as a, like, we have to figure this out. And I will say the last note I have on this chapter chronologically is just all seems to be unraveling, which I think is just the general sense of this chapter, is that, whatever stability, whatever momentum we were starting to gain, everything just seems a little more unstable, and that it's falling apart. The Ashaman are more complicated than we thought. Rand's sanity is more complicated than it has been in a little while. I'm not going to say more complicated than we thought, because we've kind of been tracking that. But like it feels like whatever delicate balance has been struck for the last book or so, this is feeling much more fragile suddenly.
There is also one little detail in here that I think makes some of Rand's political maneuvering significantly more complicated. Because at one point, while he is like sweeping the castle, he spots Hareen, who is one of the leaders of the Sea Folk, in a room with Alil, who is one of the female nobles who Rand wasn't sure if they were protecting him or stabbing him on the battlefield. And this is either Robert Jordan being oddly progressive and having an all-female couple, or we should now start to have suspicions about the Sea Folk and how they're going to be interacting with Rand, because one of Rand's potential betrayers is meeting with them seemingly regularly.
And when last we heard from them, they were making a huge set of demands to seemingly increase their own power in every city on every coast and river. So that seems relevant.
Yes, exactly. Only thing I have left is the thing that you said you would remind me of at the end of the chapter, Greg, and you didn't. Let's talk about Taim, right? Because he knows two of the conspirators' names, adds two additional conspirators that Rand wasn't aware of, and then seems shocked by the addition of Deshiva to that list. And it's the last piece that stands out to me, right? Is Taim isn't just like, oh, there were more conspirators. He seems like, wait, Deshiva? And that is the moment where I'm like, ooh, how involved was Taim in the planning of this? Because he isn't just shocked there are traitors. He seems shocked by the specific name of one of the traitors.
Well, it seems to me like I ended up with a question of, does that mean these conspirators then like recruited Deshiva? I didn't think this at the time, but in Ilion now would be when, like, without Taim's notice, they were acting kind of on the plans that were in place and just attracted him. Or I still question, like, actually, I bet Taim could have known about Deshiva and it was attempting. It's actually kind of, there was an Andor plot point about this. Like, let's give up these two other conspirators in order to preserve Deshiva and keep him in place. And so that's what I referred to earlier, where it's like, well, what is the truth of what Taim knew? And it felt to me like that could have been an easy false note, right? Like, what? Yeah. Deshiva? Oh, unbelievable. Where really, in reality, if we were in his head, it would just be how mad he is that he wasn't able to keep that person in place.
Yeah, and I just want to add one additional thing here, which is I forget whether it was Gedwin or Rochade, but one of them, Rand overheard a brief conversation of them trying to convince Weiramon to leave his post in battle. And so this might actually not have been their first attempt to assassinate Rand. They were trying to get his guards away from the position that was necessary to keep Rand alive. So this shouldn't be thought of as a single event, I don't think, given what we've seen before. Any final thoughts on A Cup of Sleep before credits roll and we get all these post-credit sequences?
I was just going to say it feels very much noting the problematic creator. It feels very much like when Draco Malfoy has to try to assassinate Dumbledore. It's like he's just there trying to come up with whatever scheme he could. So spoilers for deep into Harry Potter world. Sorry.
I don't mind spoiling transphobic authors' works. Like, they can deal with it. Let's then dive into Chapter 30, Beginnings. And honestly, I'm going to throw in Chapter 31 after, because it's like a half a page. Perrin rides into town with Brady, Neild, Balwer, and several Aes Sedai. He sees a burned farm and thinks that he was right to keep Faile away, but then Elias tells him that he is going to pay for it at some point. He thinks that he followed Elias's advice and things seem to be better with Faile, and then he walks past several guards, regarding them as zealots simply from the look in their eye. The streets are crowded, but Perrin finds directions easily, and he arrives at a building and says it brings a message from the Dragon Reborn, and he gives his name. He is soon led to see Mazima, who remembers him and seems angry about Perrin hanging some of his men, and accuses Perrin of raising Manetheren in order to increase his own influence. He then notices the Aes Sedai and gets even more angry. Mazima refuses to travel by the power, but agrees to go with Perrin if he's going to meet with the Dragon Reborn, and Perrin agrees that they will ride if they leave with no delays. Mazima says he is anxious to talk to Rand. We then switch into Faile's POV, who is out hawking with Alliandre, Magdin, and Berelain, as well as Bane and Chiad, who are resting nearby. She is pleased with the change in Perrin's attitude and his willingness to yell at her, and several of the Maidens of the Sword arrive, reporting that Mazima has been meeting with the Seanchan. Faile learns that they got this rumor from 3 separate individuals, and says that she must ride for Abila immediately to see Perrin. Aiel then attack their position, and Faile orders all of the women to ride hard so they can give the news to Perrin. She is captured by an Aiel warrior, and she sees several dead soldiers, as well as Bane and Chiad captured, and then she is stripped naked, because, of course, Robert Jordan, and Bane and Chiad say it is wrong to hold Faile captive. She then sees Magdin and Alliandre captive as well, and she is upset at the deaths of all of her soldiers, but seemingly even more upset about the fact that Berelain has escaped and will make her way to Perrin. We then switch into Egwene's POV, who thinks about the progress she has made with Sheriam and with recruiting older novices, although the 2 Rivers girls don't seem to believe that Egwene is a Merlin. Gareth Bryan then approaches, and Egwene orders the sitters to get on with it, and they open a gateway directly to Tar Valon, and Egwene says that it has begun. In the next chapter, rumors spread of a war in Tar Valon, of the Seanchan return and defeat, and of Rand potentially being assassinated, and many more rumors that are both false and accurate. And then the pattern weaves. So, Greg, what did we think about what is very clearly a Marvel movie with 4 post-credit scenes?
Yeah, my top note on this is check-ins and cliffhangers. Although I'd forgotten this had happened, I wrote my notes backwards. I started my notes for the last chapter. So when you started describing this a minute ago, I'm like, all I wrote is check-ins and cliffhangers. What's he talking about? I got all confused. But anyway, besides me being a bad podcaster, I thought, one thing that jumped out, hey, we left Matt out for a whole book. He didn't make it into the check-ins. I kind of, it was clear that's what they were doing. I was like, well, at least we'll get one from Matt, and no such luck.
Nope, he's under a building.
Gone. It's like the actor needed to be changed or something. And so then other than that, I think this did the job it intended to, which is make me excited for the next book. And I will say I had said that we would leave Egwene like standing on a hill and being like, there's Tar Valon. And it was like, oh, of course I was wrong. Of course it's going to be a gate that they're walking through. Like, why would it be a hill? Like, that's an obvious one. So
you've seen Avengers Endgame. Like, they are copying this scene from Robert Jordan. It's the right way to do it.
Yeah. So, I mean, most satisfying chapter of the book? No, but I think it did exactly what it intended to.
So let's just talk about Perrin then. He rides into a village, he thinks everyone is crazy, and then he meets Mazima, who might actually be crazy. I thought the tension in this scene worked really well, especially Mazima's kind of anger about the Aes Sedai without realizing who the Ashaman were. But that's kind of all I got out of this scene. Hooray, Mazima's with Perrin now. What are your thoughts here?
I mean, fun. I'd kind of forgotten Perrin and Elias were together again. It's just been a minute. So I was like, oh, right. And they're off having buddy adventures. And then it kind of doesn't go that well. I think I've confessed on this podcast before, I'm a huge Indiana Jones fan. And for some reason, at the beginning of Last Crusade, there's this funny line River Phoenix as Indy delivers where he goes, everybody's lost but me. And, the joke, it felt very much like everybody's crazy but me. It's like, oh, wait a minute. So it was fun to check in with Perrin again. I will say it was my second choice for which of these is my favorite. I prefer the Faile to this. Yeah. Just because it's more exciting, more cliffhangery, but solid check-in. Interested to see where this goes.
Let's then talk about Faile, because you're right. This is the actually interesting section of this chapter. The first thing I just want to note is that we have 4 queens in a lot of scenes with these characters, and it was especially interesting seeing how Magdyn, a.k.a. Morghese, is being integrated into this group, right? Because Faile is a future queen, potentially. Berylane is a queen. Alliandre is a queen. And Morghese is trying to figure out how to be a servant to 3 queens. And I just thought early on in this chapter, or that section of the chapter, that's what I was interested in. And then, the Shido show up.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of fun. I also just like thinking about falconry. So they're out hawking. I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. So they aren't queens sitting in a parlor eating fancy pastries or some such. They're out there in the world being awesome. So I liked that. And then they didn't even name the Shido, right? I felt clever that I knew that's what it was.
Yeah, at the very end of the chapter, one of the Shido refers to Savannah as wanting Guy Shane, and so that's the big hint there. But yeah, you're right. It's never named.
And I was like totally there. I'm like, the fact that he just keeps saying Aiel warriors, we're supposed to think this is like a civil war conflict, and it is, but it's the one we already knew existed. It's not. Yeah. It's not like the last chapter. It's not a new faction. We're just cruising into more of the same.
So it's worth noting, the Shido have been kind of framed as the bad Aiel. They're the ones who followed Couladin and didn't believe the prophecies about Rand. But we've now got a new wrinkle on them defying convention, because Bane and Chiad are absolutely livid at the idea that Faile and others could be taken as Guy Shane. They are not Aiel. They cannot fulfill whatever it is that allows you to be Guy Shane. And this idea that the Shido are kind of like forcing Westerners to embrace this odd quirk of Giotto is something that I'm really curious to see where it goes, as we now presumably have a plot line about Faile among the Shido.
Well, and I think I'm also interested to see Perrin has kind of been a jerk towards Faile a little lately. And so now that she's in real danger, I want to see his story. Look at me, classic misogynist. Tell me how the woman's peril affects the man, please. But it does seem like both are going to be very interesting strands when they have to deal with that.
It's worth noting, at the beginning of the chapter, Faile is so happy that Perrin has been a jerk to her lately. She's like, he yelled at me, hooray! And that's weird. Robert Jordan, we didn't need that. That being said, there is kind of an interesting quirk on this at the end of the chapter. Alliandre is captured, Magdyn is captured, Faile is captured, Berylane gets away. And so if the big conflict between Faile and Perrin has been, what about Berylane, her being alone with with Perrin for potentially an extended period is gonna potentially be an issue. We've still got some unresolved prophecies about falcons and hawks, and the falcon is now kidnapped and the hawk is going to be around Perrin.
I didn't remember any of that about the prophecies, but I will say, I still don't find... I just trust Perrin, so I don't feel a lot of drama in that, though I recognize I'm supposed to at this point.
And then Egwene opens a gateway. Bum, bum, bum. I think the only note here I have other than that is that At one point, Egwene talks about how many new novices there are, and she says the hall would have not accepted that rule, except there is one woman who is so powerful, they're willing to let all of these women join in order to have her. And so that's a character we should be keeping an eye out for. But otherwise, hey, Greg, on your left, there's a bunch of gateways.
And it's really exciting. I mean, I think I said somewhere back when we started this book that it felt like we weren't going to get the Battle of Tar Valon, but I'm excited for that battle, and I would say the after chapter suggests that's exactly where we'll be when we start. So I say that in the sense of there's not going to be like a long siege period first, which at some point they were saying there might be. It sounds like it's going to be at least active fighting somewhat, that enough so that rumors can spread. So I'm excited for that. And then after then is just like a list of other plots going on, and they're all sound like good plots, and plots I kind of wish we'd gotten more of this book, but happy to get them next book and to see where this develops more. Yeah,
that's all I got to say. That's absolutely correct.
That's a book.
I'm now going to ask our traditional end of book question. Greg, what comes next? Right? If this was a Treadwater book, what are we expecting in the next 500-600 pages?
I think Tar Valon is top on that list. Even though the Shan-Chan get a mention here, I think they've been rebuffed enough that they'll kind of spend the next book regrouping, and we won't hear a ton about them. Okay. And then I think the Perrin Faile drama will be the counterpoint to that. I don't know where Elaine's plot goes from here, which may mean it's very central and there's new surprises, or it could kind of chill for a book, I feel like, as Rand sorts out all the stuff he's got going on and then gets there eventually, though you were right to point out that Min is like, let's just go unite all this and keep things moving. So I think it'll be a much more Perrin Faile book and an Egwene book than any of the other strands.
Still no Matt?
I mean, hard to know how he jumps in. It feels like we've never really left a character for 2 books, have we? I don't think.
That's true, yeah.
So it feels like we should get him back in, but I feel like he's got to be involved in one of these plots. I mean, in some ways, Egwene's plot makes the most sense. He was supposed to tag along with that group, but he's just been left so far geographically behind with none of these gateway people that it seems hard to get him back in.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. I will note you've just outlined like 6 different plots that you're excited for. One of them is widely known in the community as the plot line of doom, and that acronym spells plod for a reason. So I'm so sorry. Most of them will be very exciting. Any last thoughts before we say, hey, guess what? We've got a recap next week, and then we're taking a little break.
No homework next week. When I say that in class, people cheer. People get all excited that I'm not actually making them read or write. So there you go. You don't have to read, dear listeners. We hope you're enjoying this journey, that you're still here with us. I will say, and Tylor caught me being nice to this podcast on my own personal social media, which is to say, we're going to continue on with this project. There's no sign of stopping. I think especially where we're on the downhill now, we're going to cruise till the end.
Probably only 3 more years.
But our back catalog is always available, and we would love it if people can kind of, if you're loving Wheel of Time, if you're loving the journey of our show, to just kind of throw it on your socials or give a shout out. That would be great.
It's also worth noting, when this episode is airing, there is a Kickstarter going on for a Wheel of Time board game. Back it. I need that to happen. I'm going to own that board game.
All right, Tylor, make yourself a note that we put that at the front of the episode, because people have definitely tuned out by now when they heard us get to the end. So we should throw that in at the top of the recap episode. But yes, please share it, share the word, just help us continue to grow this show. I think we're both thinking of it now as this kind of unique journey that will be eventually a 15 season experience, and we can't wait to share the next one. So see you next week for the recap. Where are we going to do that, Tylor?
Through the glass columns.